Most people believe their thinking problems are personal. They assume they lack discipline, intelligence, focus, or motivation. When clarity disappears, they blame themselves. Analytical thinkers understand something different. Modern life is hostile to clear thinking. Confusion is not a personal failure. It is a predictable outcome of the environment. This audiobook is about analytical thinking in a noisy world, not as a motivational ideal, but as a practical response to constant cognitive interference. Most minds today are not weak. They are overloaded. Clear thinking requires conditions that modern life actively undermines. Speed, volume, urgency, distraction. These forces are not neutral. They reshape how the brain allocates attention, processes information, and makes decisions. Analytical thinkers recognize that thinking quality is not just internal, it is environmental. Most people treat their mind as independent of context. Analytical thinkers know better. Context determines cognition. Modern life compresses attention. Notifications interrupt thought before it stabilizes. Information arrives faster than it can be processed. Opinions appear before understanding has time to form. The result is not ignorance. It is fragmentation. Fragmented attention produces fragmented thinking. Most people mistake this fragmentation for normalcy because it is common. But common does not mean optimal. Analytical thinkers notice the cost. They notice how shallow thinking feels effortless, while deep thinking feels exhausting. They notice how reacting feels easier than reasoning. This is not coincidence. Modern environments reward reaction. They reward speed, visibility, immediacy, and constant responsiveness. These rewards shape behavior, and behavior shapes cognition. Analytical thinking slows under these conditions. Clarity requires uninterrupted attention. Modern life interrupts constantly. Another destructive force is information abundance. Information is no longer scarce. Attention is. Most people consume far more information than they can process. This creates the illusion of understanding without integration. Analytical thinkers distinguish between input and comprehension. Consuming information is easy. Understanding requires synthesis. Synthesis requires silence. Modern life rarely allows silence. Even moments of rest are filled with content. Phones replace pauses. Scrolling replaces reflection. The mind never settles. Analytical thinkers recognize this as a structural problem. They do not attempt to out-discipline the environment. They redesign their relationship to it. Another reason modern life degrades thinking is constant urgency. Everything feels important. Everything demands immediate response. The mind remains in a low-level state of alert. Alertness narrows focus. It reduces cognitive flexibility. It prioritizes short-term action over long-term reasoning. Analytical thinkers are suspicious of urgency. They ask, what actually requires immediate action? What only feels urgent? What benefits from delay? This questioning restores proportion. Most urgency is emotional, not logical. Modern life also encourages opinion formation without understanding. People are exposed to conclusions before evidence. Reactions are expected before reflection. Positions are taken before analysis. This reverses thinking. Analytical thinkers resist premature opinion. They allow ambiguity. They delay judgment. They tolerate not knowing. This tolerance is rare and increasingly valuable. Another factor is cognitive fatigue. The brain consumes energy when making decisions. Modern life demands constant micro-decisions, notifications, messages, choices, reactions. This drains mental resources. When fatigue sets in, thinking quality collapses. Analytical thinkers manage cognitive energy deliberately. They reduce unnecessary decisions. They simplify routines. They preserve attention for what matters. Most people do the opposite. They spend clarity on trivial matters, then attempt important thinking while depleted. This inversion produces poor outcomes. Modern life also blurs boundaries between thinking and reacting. There is little separation between stimulus and response. Messages arrive instantly. Replies are expected instantly. Analytical thinkers rebuild boundaries. They create distance between input and output. Distance restores thinking. Another destructive force is social comparison noise. Constant exposure to others' opinions, achievements, and reactions distorts self-assessment. Attention shifts outward. Thinking becomes performative. Analytical thinkers minimize comparison. They focus inward on structure, not outward on validation. This focus stabilizes judgment. Another issue is context switching. Switching between tasks fragments attention. The mind loses depth each time focus shifts. Analytical thinkers reduce context switching aggressively. They batch tasks. They protect deep work. They avoid multitasking. Depth requires continuity. Modern life discourages continuity. Analytical thinkers design against this. The central insight of this chapter is simple. Clear thinking is not lost because people are incapable. It is lost because the environment is misaligned with cognition. Blaming yourself misses the point. The solution is not more effort. It is better design. Analytical thinkers do not fight modern life directly. They carve out clarity within it. In the chapters ahead, we will examine how information overload, attention collapse, and constant input degrade thinking, and how analytical thinkers restore clarity deliberately. Clear thinking is not about escaping the world. It is about building quiet inside noise. Chapter 2: Information Overload and Cognitive Fatigue. Most people believe they are tired because they work too much. They assume exhaustion comes from effort, responsibility, or lack of rest. While these factors matter, analytical thinkers recognize a deeper cause. Modern fatigue is cognitive, not physical. The mind is overwhelmed long before the body is. Information overload is not just about volume. It is about unprocessed input. Every article skimmed, every notification checked, every opinion encountered consumes attention. When this input is not integrated, it accumulates as mental residue. This residue produces cognitive fatigue. Analytical thinkers understand that the brain has a limited capacity for decision-making and reasoning. When this capacity is exceeded, clarity collapses. Most people continue consuming information even after this collapse occurs. They mistake stimulation for engagement. But stimulation drains clarity. Information overload fragments attention. Each new input competes for priority. The mind shifts rapidly between topics without completing any line of reasoning. This prevents depth. Depth requires sustained focus. Information overload prevents sustained focus. The result is shallow understanding across many topics and mastery of none. Analytical thinkers recognize that more information does not equal better thinking. Beyond a certain point, additional input reduces accuracy instead of improving it. This is why people often feel less clear after consuming more content. The mind becomes crowded. Cognitive fatigue also reduces skepticism. When mental energy is depleted, the brain defaults to shortcuts. It accepts familiar ideas uncritically. It relies on emotion and authority instead of reasoning. Analytical thinkers are aware of this vulnerability. They know that poor thinking often occurs not because ideas are bad, but because the mind is too tired to evaluate them properly. This is why fatigue is dangerous. Fatigued minds are easily influenced. Another overlooked aspect of information overload is context loss. Information arrives stripped of context. Headlines replace explanations. Opinions replace evidence. The mind attempts to integrate fragments into coherent models and fails. Analytical thinkers avoid fragmentary input. They prefer fewer sources, deeper engagement, and slower consumption. This allows context to form. Context is essential for analytical thinking. Without context, information becomes noise. Another cause of cognitive fatigue is constant novelty. The brain is wired to notice new stimuli. Modern information environments exploit this bias relentlessly. Each new item feels urgent. Each update demands attention. This constant novelty keeps the brain in a heightened state of alert. Alertness consumes energy. Analytical thinkers limit novelty deliberately. They reduce exposure to constantly changing input. They create stable information environments. Stability restores mental energy. Cognitive fatigue also distorts perception of difficulty. When the mind is overloaded, even simple tasks feel hard. Decision-making feels heavy. Concentration feels impossible. People misinterpret this as lack of discipline. Analytical thinkers recognize it as capacity depletion. You cannot think clearly on an empty cognitive budget. This is why analytical thinkers manage information intake as carefully as physical nutrition. Not all information is equal. Some information nourishes understanding. Some information exhausts it. Analytical thinkers distinguish between the two. They ask, does this information increase understanding? Does it provide structure? Does it help me reason better? If the answer is no, they limit exposure. Another subtle effect of information overload is emotional contamination. Information often carries emotional charge, outrage, fear, urgency, excitement. Repeated exposure to emotionally charged content elevates baseline stress. Stress reduces cognitive flexibility. Analytical thinkers minimize emotionally loaded input when clarity is required. They protect emotional bandwidth. Cognitive fatigue also impairs long-term thinking. When the mind is tired, it prioritizes immediate relief. Short-term thinking dominates. Long-term consequences fade. Analytical thinkers schedule deep thinking when mental energy is highest. They do not attempt important decisions while cognitively exhausted. This timing discipline preserves judgment. Most people do the opposite. They leave important thinking for the end of the day, when clarity is lowest. This produces predictable mistakes. Another cause of overload is decision accumulation. Each choice consumes cognitive resources. Modern life demands constant micro-decisions. Analytical thinkers reduce decision load deliberately. They standardize routines. They automate low-stakes choices. They eliminate unnecessary options. This preserves clarity for high-stakes thinking. Cognitive fatigue also reduces error detection. When tired, the brain overlooks contradictions, inconsistencies, and flawed reasoning. Analytical thinkers slow down when fatigue is present. They double-check assumptions. They postpone conclusions. They seek external verification. This prevents costly mistakes. Another important insight is that rest alone does not solve cognitive fatigue. Rest helps, but without reducing input, fatigue returns quickly. Analytical thinkers pair rest with input control. They reduce information flow during recovery periods. Silence restores cognition more effectively than stimulation. Another factor is false urgency created by information volume. When too much information arrives at once, everything feels important. Analytical thinkers reintroduce hierarchy. They ask, what actually matters? What can be ignored? What requires thought now, and what can wait? This prioritization restores clarity. The central lesson of this chapter is clear. Information overload degrades thinking long before you notice it. Cognitive fatigue is not weakness. It is a signal. Analytical thinkers listen to this signal. They reduce input. They slow consumption. They protect attention. Clarity returns when noise is removed. In the next chapter, we will examine why attention, not intelligence, is the true bottleneck of clear thinking and how analytical thinkers protect it deliberately. Chapter 3. Attention is the real bottleneck. Most people believe intelligence is the limiting factor in clear thinking. They assume that if they were smarter, more educated, or more informed, their decisions would improve automatically. Analytical thinkers understand a different reality. Attention, not intelligence, is the true bottleneck of thinking. You cannot think clearly about what you cannot attend to. No amount of intelligence compensates for fragmented attention. Reasoning requires sustained focus. Understanding requires continuity. Insight emerges only when the mind remains with a problem long enough for structure to appear. Modern life makes this increasingly rare. Attention is constantly divided. Messages interrupt thought before it stabilizes. Notifications pull the mind outward. Content refreshes endlessly. Focus resets every few minutes. This fragmentation prevents depth. Analytical thinkers recognize that attention is not infinite. It is a limited resource that must be protected deliberately. Most people spend attention impulsively. Analytical thinkers invest it strategically. Another misunderstanding is that multitasking improves efficiency. In reality, multitasking degrades thinking quality. When attention switches rapidly between tasks, cognitive residue accumulates. Part of the mind remains attached to the previous task while attempting to engage the next. This residue reduces clarity. Analytical thinkers avoid multitasking during thinking-intensive work. They batch tasks. They separate shallow activity from deep reasoning. They protect uninterrupted time. Depth requires attention continuity. Without continuity, thinking remains shallow regardless of effort. Attention collapse also explains why people feel mentally exhausted without accomplishing much. Energy is spent switching, not reasoning. Analytical thinkers reduce switching costs aggressively. Another critical insight is that attention follows environment. Willpower plays a role, but environment dominates. A noisy environment produces noisy thinking. A fragmented environment produces fragmented reasoning. Analytical thinkers shape their environments to support focus. They reduce visual clutter. They silence unnecessary alerts. They create predictable workspaces. This design reduces friction. Another reason attention matters more than intelligence is attention determines what enters working memory. Working memory is where reasoning happens. It can hold only a few items at once. When attention is divided, working memory fills with irrelevant stimuli. Analytical thinking becomes impossible. Analytical thinkers are selective about what they allow into working memory. They filter aggressively. They ask, "Does this deserve my attention? Does this improve understanding? Does this support my current objective?" Most input fails this test. Attention is also affected by emotional charge. Emotionally charged information captures attention disproportionately. Outrage, fear, and excitement hijack focus. Analytical thinkers are aware of this bias. They limit exposure to emotionally manipulative content. Not because they are indifferent, but because clarity requires emotional stability. Attention is not just about focus, it is about depth over time. Shallow attention produces shallow conclusions. Analytical thinkers allow attention to linger. They sit with problems longer than is comfortable. They resist the urge to move on quickly. They allow confusion to resolve naturally. This patience produces insight. Another key idea is that attention is consumed by decision noise. Constant choices, what to read, what to respond to, what to check, drain attention before thinking begins. Analytical thinkers minimize unnecessary decisions. They standardize routines. They limit options. They automate low-impact choices. This preserves attention for reasoning. Attention also degrades when boundaries disappear. When work, information, and communication blend into a single stream, the mind never disengages. Analytical thinkers restore boundaries. They create clear start and stop points. They separate thinking time from consumption time. They schedule disconnection. Boundaries restore cognitive capacity. Another important factor is time fragmentation. Short bursts of attention are insufficient for complex reasoning. Deep thinking requires extended periods without interruption. Analytical thinkers protect long blocks of time. They do not expect insight to appear instantly. They understand that clarity often arrives late, after sustained engagement. Attention is also influenced by expectation of interruption. Even the possibility of interruption reduces depth. The mind remains partially alert, waiting for disruption. Analytical thinkers eliminate the expectation of interruption during deep work. They signal unavailability. They remove devices. They create isolation. This allows full engagement. Another overlooked aspect is attention recovery. Attention needs recovery just like physical energy. Constant stimulation prevents recovery. Analytical thinkers allow boredom. They allow silence. They allow mental rest. Boredom restores attention. Modern life treats boredom as a problem. Analytical thinkers treat it as a resource. Attention also determines learning quality. Without sustained attention, information is not integrated. Knowledge remains fragmented. Analytical thinkers slow learning deliberately. They revisit ideas. They connect concepts. They reflect. This transforms information into understanding. The central lesson of this chapter is clear. If you want to think better, you must protect attention. Attention is the gateway to reasoning. Without it, intelligence is wasted. Analytical thinkers do not attempt to think clearly in chaotic conditions. They remove chaos first. In the next chapter, we will explore why constant input prevents understanding and how analytical thinkers create space for synthesis. Clear thinking does not begin with effort. It begins with attention control. Chapter 4: Why constant input prevents understanding. Most people believe understanding comes from exposure. They assume that the more they read, watch, listen to, and absorb, the clearer things will become. When clarity does not arrive, they respond by consuming even more information. Analytical thinkers understand why this fails. Understanding does not come from input. It comes from processing. Processing requires time, silence, and mental space, all of which constant input destroys. Modern life encourages continuous consumption. There is always something new to read, watch, or react to. Pauses feel uncomfortable, even wasteful. But without pauses, understanding never forms. Analytical thinking depends on integration. Integration occurs when the mind connects ideas, resolves contradictions, and builds coherent mental models. This process cannot happen while new input is constantly arriving. Constant input keeps the mind in reception mode. Reception mode is passive. Understanding is active. Analytical thinkers recognize this distinction. They know when to stop consuming and start processing. Most people never make this transition. Another reason constant input prevents understanding is cognitive interference. Each new piece of information competes with existing thoughts. Instead of strengthening understanding, it displaces it. This creates shallow familiarity without depth. People often recognize concepts without being able to explain or apply them. They mistake recognition for comprehension. Analytical thinkers do not trust recognition. They test understanding by explanation, application, and synthesis. If an idea cannot be explained simply, it is not yet understood. Constant input also prevents error detection. Understanding requires noticing inconsistencies and gaps. This requires revisiting ideas. New input pulls attention away before errors are noticed. Analytical thinkers revisit ideas deliberately. They sit with questions. They allow uncertainty to surface. They refine explanations. This repetition deepens understanding. Another overlooked effect of constant input is premature closure. People encounter conclusions before they understand the problem. Opinions arrive before evidence. Interpretations appear before context. This shortcuts thinking. Analytical thinkers delay closure. They resist conclusions until structure is visible. This patience prevents distortion. Constant input also trains the brain to expect stimulation. Silence feels uncomfortable. Stillness feels unproductive. Analytical thinkers retrain the brain to tolerate quiet. Quiet is not empty. Quiet is where synthesis happens. Another reason constant input prevents understanding is lack of consolidation. The brain consolidates learning during periods of rest. Without rest, learning remains fragile. Analytical thinkers allow consolidation. They space learning. They revisit ideas after delay. They allow memory to stabilize. This improves retention and application. Constant input also distorts priority. When everything arrives at once, nothing feels important. Analytical thinkers reintroduce hierarchy. They decide what deserves deep understanding and what can remain superficial. Not everything needs depth, but what matters does. Another problem is fragmented narrative. Information arrives as disconnected fragments. Without integration, these fragments never form a coherent picture. Analytical thinkers construct narratives deliberately. They ask, how does this fit with what I already know? What does this explain? What remains unexplained? These questions guide synthesis. Constant input also encourages reactive thinking. People respond to content instead of reflecting on it. Reaction replaces analysis. Analytical thinkers slow response. They reflect before reacting. This delay improves clarity. Another subtle effect is illusory productivity. Consuming information feels productive. Processing feels slow. Analytical thinkers choose effectiveness over activity. They prioritize understanding over volume. Constant input also undermines original thought. When the mind is always filled with others' ideas, there is no space for independent reasoning. Analytical thinkers create space for original synthesis. They disconnect intentionally. They allow ideas to incubate. They think without input. This incubation produces insight. Another reason understanding fails under constant input is emotional saturation. Information often carries emotional charge. Continuous exposure elevates stress. Stress impairs reasoning. Analytical thinkers manage emotional load by limiting emotionally charged content. This preserves mental clarity. Understanding also requires time awareness. Ideas need time to mature. Immediate conclusions are often shallow. Analytical thinkers revisit ideas after delay. They allow perspective to change. This temporal distance improves accuracy. The core lesson of this chapter is clear. You cannot understand while constantly consuming. Understanding requires stopping. Stopping feels uncomfortable because modern environments discourage it. Analytical thinkers tolerate this discomfort. They embrace silence. They allow boredom. They create space. This space allows ideas to connect, models to form, and clarity to emerge. In the next chapter, we will explore how to distinguish mental noise from mental signal, and why most people mistake one for the other. Clarity is not found in more input. It is created in the absence of it. Chapter 5: Mental Noise vs. Mental Signal. Most people believe confusion comes from lack of information. In reality, confusion usually comes from too much noise. Analytical thinkers understand a critical distinction that most people never learn to make. Not all thoughts are signals. Most are noise. Clear thinking depends on the ability to tell the difference. Mental noise is any thought, input, or reaction that does not improve understanding. It feels urgent. It feels important. It feels emotionally charged. But it does not move thinking forward. Mental signal is different. Signal clarifies structure. It reduces uncertainty. It improves decision quality. Analytical thinkers do not aim to eliminate thought. They aim to filter it. Most minds are crowded. Thoughts overlap. Reactions compete. Opinions echo without being examined. The result is a constant internal dialogue that feels busy but produces little clarity. Analytical thinkers notice this background noise. They do not treat every thought as meaningful. They ask, does this thought improve understanding? Does it clarify a decision? Does it reveal structure? If the answer is no, the thought is noise. Noise often comes from emotion. Anxiety produces catastrophic scenarios. Anger produces blame narratives. Excitement produces unrealistic expectations. These thoughts feel compelling because they are emotionally charged. Analytical thinkers do not confuse emotional intensity with importance. Intensity amplifies noise. Signal is often quiet. Another major source of mental noise is unresolved input. Information that is consumed but not processed lingers as cognitive residue. It resurfaces as fragments, half-formed ideas, vague concerns, or intrusive thoughts. Analytical thinkers process input deliberately. They summarize. They integrate. They discard what is irrelevant. This prevents accumulation. Noise also comes from social imitation. Opinions absorbed from others masquerade as original thought. The mind repeats ideas without examining them. Analytical thinkers slow down imitation. They ask, do I actually understand this idea? Would I reach this conclusion independently? What evidence supports it? This questioning strips away borrowed noise. Another source of noise is premature problem solving. The mind rushes to solutions before the problem is understood. This creates shallow answers and persistent confusion. Analytical thinkers delay solutions. They stay with the problem longer. They define it precisely. Signal emerges when problems are well-defined. Noise dominates when problems are vague. Mental noise is also amplified by constant self-evaluation. People monitor how they are doing, how they appear, and how they compare. This self-referential loop consumes attention. Analytical thinkers step outside this loop. They focus on structure, not self-image. This shift quiets the mind. Another important distinction is between thinking and reacting. Reaction is immediate. Thinking is delayed. Reaction generates noise. Thinking extracts signal. Analytical thinkers insert a pause between stimulus and response. This pause filters noise automatically. Without pause, reaction dominates. Another subtle source of noise is false urgency. Thoughts framed as must decide now bypass analysis. Urgency compresses thinking and amplifies emotion. Analytical thinkers challenge urgency. They ask, what happens if I wait? What actually requires immediate action? What benefits from delay? This reframing reduces noise. Signal often emerges only after urgency fades. Another common mistake is over-attending to internal chatter. Not every internal voice deserves attention. Analytical thinkers observe thoughts without engaging them immediately. They allow thoughts to pass without response. This observation separates signal from noise. Noise repeats. Signal persists and clarifies. Another source of mental noise is binary thinking. Either-or frames oversimplify reality. They eliminate nuance and hide alternatives. Analytical thinkers look for gradients. They ask, what exists between these extremes? What trade-offs are present? What variables matter most? Signal lives in nuance. Noise thrives in absolutes. Mental noise also increases when attention is fragmented. Context switching creates unfinished mental threads. These threads compete for attention. Analytical thinkers reduce fragmentation. They complete thoughts. They close loops. They finish processing. This reduces background noise. Another key insight is that signal is often boring. Noise is dramatic. It tells stories. It provokes emotion. Signal is subtle. It requires effort to notice. Analytical thinkers are willing to engage with boredom. They know boredom often precedes insight. Another reason people struggle to detect signal is attachment to certainty. Noise often provides false certainty. Signal often introduces complexity. Analytical thinkers tolerate ambiguity. They allow uncertainty to remain while understanding develops. This patience allows signal to emerge. Mental noise also comes from excessive explanation. People explain events to reduce discomfort, not to improve accuracy. Analytical thinkers resist premature explanation. They allow questions to remain unanswered. Signal emerges when explanations are earned, not rushed. Another distinction is between narrative and structure. Narratives feel meaningful. Structure is meaningful. Analytical thinkers prioritize structure. They ask, what patterns exist? What incentives shape behavior? What constraints matter? Structure produces signal. Narrative often produces noise. The central lesson of this chapter is clear. Clear thinking depends more on removing noise than adding information. Analytical thinkers do not chase more input. They remove distractions. They filter thoughts. They quiet reactions. Signal becomes visible when noise is reduced. In the next chapter, we will explore how to reduce cognitive load deliberately and why simplicity is a prerequisite for clarity. Clear thinking is not louder thinking. It is quieter thinking. Chapter 6: How to Reduce Cognitive Load. Most people believe clear thinking requires effort. They assume that if they try harder, focus more intensely, or push through fatigue, clarity will eventually return. Analytical thinkers understand a different principle. Clear thinking requires reduction, not exertion. Cognitive load is the total amount of mental effort being used at any given time. When cognitive load exceeds capacity, thinking quality collapses. This collapse feels like confusion, indecision, and mental exhaustion. Analytical thinkers do not attempt to operate at full cognitive capacity continuously. They design their lives to stay below the threshold where thinking degrades. The first step in reducing cognitive load is eliminating unnecessary decisions. Every decision consumes mental energy, even small ones. Modern life demands constant choice: what to read, what to respond to, what to check, what to ignore. Analytical thinkers reduce this burden deliberately. They standardize routines. They automate low-stakes choices. They remove trivial options. This preserves clarity for decisions that matter. Another major contributor to cognitive load is unfinished mental loops. Unresolved tasks, unanswered questions, and vague commitments linger in the background, competing for attention. Analytical thinkers close loops. They write things down. They schedule decisions. They define next actions. Externalizing commitments frees mental space. The mind is not designed to store everything. It is designed to process. Another way cognitive load accumulates is environmental clutter. Visual clutter, digital clutter, and informational clutter all compete for attention. Analytical thinkers simplify their environments. They reduce visual noise. They organize digital spaces. They limit information sources. This simplification reduces background cognitive drain. Another major load source is emotional friction. Unresolved emotional concerns consume attention silently. Anxiety, resentment, and anticipation occupy mental bandwidth. Analytical thinkers address emotional load explicitly. They name emotions. They clarify concerns. They reduce uncertainty where possible. This reduces hidden cognitive drain. Cognitive load is also increased by unclear priorities. When everything feels important, the mind cannot allocate attention effectively. Analytical thinkers create hierarchy. They decide what matters now and what does not. This clarity reduces mental conflict. Another contributor to cognitive overload is context switching. Switching between tasks resets attention repeatedly. Each switch leaves residue that impairs thinking. Analytical thinkers batch similar tasks. They separate shallow work from deep work. They protect uninterrupted time for reasoning. This continuity reduces load. Another powerful reduction strategy is simplifying goals. Complex goal structures increase cognitive burden. Too many objectives compete for attention. Analytical thinkers focus on fewer goals. They accept trade-offs. Clarity improves when priorities are limited. Cognitive load is also amplified by over-monitoring performance. Constant self-evaluation consumes attention and increases anxiety. Analytical thinkers reduce self-monitoring during execution. They separate planning from doing. During execution, they act. During review, they evaluate. This separation improves performance and clarity. Another source of load is over-preparation. Preparing for every contingency creates mental clutter. Analytical thinkers prepare for likely scenarios and design flexibility for the rest. This balances readiness with simplicity. Another effective strategy is using checklists. Checklists externalize thinking. They reduce memory demand and prevent oversight. Analytical thinkers use checklists for important decisions, repetitive processes, high-stakes tasks. This reduces cognitive strain. Cognitive load is also reduced by limiting information intake. Analytical thinkers stop consuming information once marginal value declines. They shift from input to synthesis. This prevents overload. Another important technique is temporal separation. Thinking and acting are different cognitive modes. Analytical thinkers separate them. They think when calm. They act when prepared. This separation reduces load during execution. Cognitive load is also affected by expectation management. Unclear expectations create uncertainty, which consumes attention. Analytical thinkers clarify expectations early. This reduces mental friction. Another overlooked factor is physical state. Fatigue, hunger, and poor sleep increase cognitive load. Analytical thinkers treat physical maintenance as cognitive support. They protect sleep. They manage energy. They avoid decision-making when depleted. This preserves clarity. Another reduction strategy is simplifying language. Vague language creates vague thought. Analytical thinkers use precise language. They define terms. They avoid ambiguity. They specify actions. This clarity reduces mental effort. Cognitive load also decreases when systems replace memory. Relying on memory increases strain. Systems reduce it. Analytical thinkers externalize. Schedules, reminders, processes. This frees mental resources. Another powerful technique is limiting emotional input. Emotionally charged content increases stress and cognitive load. Analytical thinkers reduce exposure when clarity is required. This stabilizes thinking. The core lesson of this chapter is simple. Clear thinking is easier when there is less to think about. Analytical thinkers do not pride themselves on juggling complexity. They remove it. By reducing cognitive load, they create space for insight. In the next chapter, we will explore how to build a quiet thinking environment and why environment design matters more than discipline. Clarity does not come from effort. It comes from simplicity. Chapter 7. Building a quiet thinking environment. Most people believe clear thinking is a matter of discipline. They assume that if they try harder, resist distraction, or improve willpower, their thinking will improve. Analytical thinkers understand a different truth. Environment shapes thinking more than intention ever will. The mind responds automatically to its surroundings. Noise, clutter, and interruption degrade thinking regardless of motivation. Analytical thinkers design environments that make clear thinking the default. They do not rely on constant self-control. They remove the need for it. A quiet thinking environment is not defined by silence alone. It is defined by low cognitive interference. Interference can be visual, auditory, digital, or emotional. Analytical thinkers reduce all forms. The first step is removing unnecessary stimuli. Every visible object competes for attention. Every notification interrupts focus. Every open tab increases cognitive load. Analytical thinkers simplify their physical and digital spaces. They reduce visual clutter. They close unused tabs. They silence non-essential alerts. This simplification restores mental capacity. Another key principle is predictability. Unpredictable environments demand constant vigilance. The mind remains partially alert, waiting for interruption. Analytical thinkers create predictable routines. They work at consistent times. They think in consistent locations. They reduce uncertainty. Predictability lowers cognitive load. Another important element is spatial separation. Different activities require different mental states. Analytical thinkers separate consumption from creation, communication from reflection, shallow work from deep thinking. This separation conditions the mind. Certain spaces signal focus. Others signal rest. This reduces friction. Another factor is digital boundary control. Digital environments are designed to capture attention. Analytical thinkers counter this deliberately. They remove distracting apps. They disable autoplay. They limit social media access. This is not deprivation, it is protection. Another important aspect is time-based isolation. Clear thinking requires uninterrupted time. Analytical thinkers protect blocks of time aggressively. They signal unavailability. They schedule deep work. They avoid reactive availability. This isolation allows thought to deepen. Another often ignored factor is auditory environment. Sound affects cognition. Constant noise increases stress and reduces focus. Analytical thinkers minimize auditory distraction. They choose quiet or neutral background sound. This stabilizes attention. Another key element is information hygiene. Not all information deserves entry into the thinking environment. Analytical thinkers curate input. They limit news intake. They avoid emotionally charged content. They prioritize depth over volume. This reduces noise. Another principle is device placement. Proximity increases temptation. Analytical thinkers keep distracting devices out of reach during thinking periods. Distance reduces impulse. Another important factor is expectation management. Clear thinking fails when others expect immediate response. Analytical thinkers manage expectations. They set response windows. They communicate availability. They reduce interruption. This preserves attention. Another overlooked element is psychological safety. Fear of judgment increases cognitive load. Analytical thinkers create environments where ideas can be explored without immediate evaluation. This safety encourages deeper thought. Another factor is ritualization. Rituals signal the brain to shift modes. Analytical thinkers use rituals to begin thinking sessions. This conditions focus. Another important design choice is environmental friction. Good environments make distraction difficult and focus easy. Analytical thinkers add friction to distractions and remove friction from focus. This guides behavior automatically. Another element is rest integration. Clear thinking requires recovery. Analytical thinkers include rest within the environment. They allow pauses. They allow boredom. They allow silence. This restores clarity. Another key factor is consistency. Occasional quiet is not enough. Analytical thinkers maintain consistent environments. Consistency trains the mind. Another insight is that thinking environments are personal. What distracts one person may not distract another. Analytical thinkers experiment. They adjust until clarity improves. This iterative design improves results. The central lesson of this chapter is clear. Clear thinking is not forced, it is enabled. Analytical thinkers succeed because they design environments that support thinking instead of fighting against it. In the final chapter, we will bring everything together by showing why clarity is created, not found, and how analytical thinkers sustain it over time. Clear thinking does not begin in the mind. It begins in the environment. Chapter 8. Clarity is created, not found. Most people search for clarity as if it already exists somewhere. They look for the right book, the right advice, the right insight, or the right moment when everything suddenly makes sense. They assume clarity will arrive once enough information is gathered. Analytical thinkers understand a different truth. Clarity does not appear. It is built. Clear thinking is not discovered, it is constructed deliberately. This audiobook has shown that confusion is not random. It is produced by environments, habits, overload, noise, and unmanaged attention. Clarity emerges only when these forces are reduced. Most people wait for clarity before acting. Analytical thinkers act to create the conditions where clarity can emerge. This shift is essential. Clarity is not a feeling. It is a state of alignment between attention, environment, and reasoning. When these elements align, thinking stabilizes. When they do not, thinking fragments. Another common misconception is that clarity is permanent. It is not. Clarity is fragile. It degrades under fatigue, overload, emotional stress, and noise. Analytical thinkers do not assume clarity will last. They maintain it. Maintenance is the skill. This is why analytical thinkers rely on systems, not moods. They do not wait to feel clear. They follow processes that produce clarity repeatedly. These processes include limiting input, protecting attention, reducing cognitive load, designing quiet environments, slowing decisions, reviewing outcomes. Each process removes friction. Each removal restores clarity. Another important insight is that clarity is not maximal information. It is optimal information. Analytical thinkers know when to stop consuming and start thinking. They do not confuse more data with better understanding. They prioritize signal over noise. Clarity also requires acceptance of uncertainty. Many people chase clarity to eliminate uncertainty. This chase fails because uncertainty is unavoidable. Analytical thinkers accept uncertainty and work within it. They seek clarity of structure, not certainty of outcome. This distinction prevents paralysis. Clarity is also not emotional comfort. Sometimes clarity reveals uncomfortable truths, misalignment, poor decisions, or the need for change. Analytical thinkers accept discomfort as part of clarity. They do not avoid clarity to protect feelings. They prefer truth over reassurance. Another reason people fail to achieve clarity is constant self-judgment. They evaluate themselves while thinking. This divides attention and increases noise. Analytical thinkers separate thinking from self-evaluation. They analyze problems without attaching identity. This separation improves objectivity. Clarity also requires temporal patience. Understanding unfolds over time. Analytical thinkers revisit ideas. They allow models to evolve. They accept that insight often arrives late, after sustained engagement. Rushing clarity produces shallow conclusions. Patience produces depth. Another key principle is clarity through subtraction. Most clarity comes not from adding ideas, but from removing distractions, commitments, and assumptions. Analytical thinkers remove unnecessary inputs, excess goals, vague commitments, emotional clutter. Each removal sharpens focus. Another insight is that clarity is contextual. What is clear in one environment may be confusing in another. Analytical thinkers adapt their thinking process to context. They do not expect universal clarity. They design for situational clarity. Clarity also improves with decision hygiene. Analytical thinkers document decisions. They review outcomes. They refine assumptions. This feedback loop sharpens judgment. Without review, clarity stagnates. Another essential element is attention discipline. Attention is the gatekeeper of clarity. Analytical thinkers protect attention fiercely. They limit distraction. They reduce interruption. They schedule thinking deliberately. Attention creates clarity. Another misconception is that clarity requires isolation from the world. Analytical thinkers do not escape reality. They manage exposure to it. They engage selectively. This selectivity preserves mental clarity without withdrawal. Clarity is also supported by simple rules. Analytical thinkers use rules to reduce decision load. Delay irreversible decisions. Avoid thinking when emotionally charged. Reduce input when confused. Write before deciding. These rules prevent degradation. Another reason clarity feels elusive is expectation mismatch. People expect clarity to feel confident and decisive. Often, clarity feels quiet and tentative. Analytical thinkers recognize clarity by structure, not emotion. Clear thinking often feels calm, not exciting. Another important insight is that clarity compounds. Each clear decision improves future clarity. Each avoided mistake preserves optionality. Each refined system reduces future noise. Over time, clarity becomes easier to maintain. This compounding effect is subtle, but powerful. Most people live reactively. They respond to stimuli as it arrives. Analytical thinkers live deliberately. They design thinking conditions. They remove noise. They protect attention. They slow down. And as a result, clarity emerges more often and lasts longer. The final lesson of this audiobook is simple. Clarity is not something you find. It is something you build again and again. It is built through environment design, input control, attention protection, cognitive load reduction, deliberate thinking. Anyone can build clarity, not through intelligence, not through motivation, not through force, but through design. Analytical thinkers do not think clearly because they are special. They think clearly because they remove what prevents clarity. And once clarity appears, it changes everything. Decisions slow down. Regret decreases. Understanding deepens. not because life becomes simpler, but because thinking becomes stronger. And that is how analytical thinkers survive and thrive in a noisy world.